knitting secrets that no one told you. We are frogging. It's a bit of a meme that people complain about purling. Hi everyone, welcome to Garden Variety Knits. My name is Kelsey, and this is planned to be just your very standard knitting, crafting, project updates series. This is episode 1. A little bit about me. I live in Switzerland. I've lived here for about 18 months. And before that, I lived in Sydney, and I am from New Zealand originally. I picked up knitting when I moved to Switzerland because the climate here is much more conducive to wearing a bunch of knitwear than the Sydney climate. And I am really loving it. I did originally learn to knit as a kid. I think my nana taught me, and I made, the classic garter stitch scarf. And then I also did learn to knit well enough that I have this very strong memory of making a poncho, which for some reason was my dream item. Maybe that was also still garter stitch, but I definitely had to learn how to do increases. Like I was following a pattern at that point. Anyway, I also kind of picked knitting back up because a friend came to visit me when I was living in Japan for a year. And she was into knitting and we went yarn shopping. And she picked up a pattern for a hat, and I really liked the pattern. I think the shop had a sample, and I said, I'd love to be able to knit that, but I don't know if I can. But we bought all the materials and she helped me work out how to basically learn to cable for the first time and follow the pattern. It was probably particularly challenging because the pattern was in Japanese. It was charted, but that was probably something that she did a lot more work on than I did. But I actually have the hat here with me. Yeah, it's pretty cute. Twisted rib brim, like cable pattern around the crown. Yeah, it was really fun. Definitely sparked my interest again. And then again, a couple of years later, another friend was knitting some socks, and I was interested in that. And she showed me how she knits socks, and I knit a pair. So yeah, it's been a bit of a slow burn, but definitely the current level of obsession kicked off roughly when I moved to Switzerland. The idea with this series of videos is that I'll probably talk about kind of my crafting things. So that's almost all knitting, but I do own a sewing machine and I'm going to dabble in some sewing. I am considering doing some light woodwork, which may or may not get mentioned, and I am also quite interested in learning good mending techniques. I think that mending the clothes that you own or clothes that you pick up secondhand is a really cool skill to have. I think everyone should probably learn it to some degree, but I also want to learn enough skills that it's not just something I'm able to do, but something that I'm excited to do and that I feel like I can enhance the things that I own as well as just fix them so that they're literally functional. The format of this video should be pretty familiar to anyone who watches any sort of knitting YouTube. I'll go through finished objects, any works in progress. I will do a section on plans. I'll try and keep that really concrete. I'm going to go with the plans that I have quite solidly decided on and am planning on starting, probably within the interval to my next video, which is probably going to be about once a month. I'm not super prolific. I don't have something new to show every week like some people seem to manage to. And then I also want to have a section on, I watch a knitting YouTuber called Tash who does mostly knitting, and she has a section called What Caught My Eye. I might have something similar, but also just things that are still percolating, still formulating. So it might be something I have yarn for but haven't solidified my plans, or it's far down my queue. It might be something that I have seen a pattern that I really like the look of, or I just have gotten an idea where I want some sort of item. Yeah, so that's the rough structure. Oh, and then at the end I might have a section where I just do some recommendations, and I think that'll be pretty much anything goes. So it might be knitting content, it might be mending content, it might be designers, it might be YouTube channels, it might be, and then there's the category which very roughly is things that I enjoy doing while knitting. So that might be movies, podcasts, books, activities, I don't know, we'll see. Yeah, so that's the vague plan. Hopefully you stick around to see it play out. So I made a video last week that was basically catching us up to this point with all of the things that I knit in about the last year. And if you are craving finished objects, I would have a look at that video, because since that video I actually haven't finished anything. The couple of changes I've made is that I've rearranged our setup, and I did repot this guy, because this is a Monstera, but you can't really tell, because apparently they only do their fenestrations like this with the holes in the leaves, if they're happy and healthy and a little bit more mature. And mine was very pot bound and a little bit sad looking over the winter. I didn't want to repot it though until spring so that it would have a little bit more light for growth, so I just repotted it into a bigger pot and I've been fertilizing it, so fingers crossed that this will get a bit happier as well. So yeah, we can just go straight into works in progress. So the first thing that I'm working on, and this is probably my main focus at the moment, is the Elevation Loop Sweater by Other Loops, which is designed to be a saddle shoulder, very oversized, very kind of cozy sweater. And the story behind this is that I had bought a jumper from the pajama section of Kmart, which is still alive and kicking in Australia, for anyone who was wondering how long ago that was. Anyway, it was this fluffy but synthetic fabric sweater that I didn't love the feel of. Like, if I got clammy, it kind of felt sticky in a weird way, but I still kept coming back to it. I just wore it all the time. It was kind of a dark charcoal grey, and I just put it on. I went out of the house in that thing. It was pajamas, but I wore it everywhere all the time. But I didn't love it. I felt like it could be significantly upgraded. I just went looking for it. I think I actually did already donate it. So, which, as an aside, donating is just, all I mean is I put it in the clothing recycle bin at the recycling station, but it's probably just going to end up in landfill. Anyway, I did want to upgrade it, and so I bought a Bouclé yarn to make a jumper. So for that I got the Drops Alpaca Bouclé. It's my first time working with Bouclé, so I didn't want to go too high budget, but it's very soft and very, nice feeling so far. I got a kind of a beige colour, which I'm actually not completely convinced by the colour. I think it looks fine and it looks nice in the jumper format. It looks a lot like a teddy bear. I'm calling this my teddy bear jumper. But I think the grey is more neutral to me, especially dark. Actually, any shade of grey. I think that I just am happy to put grey on top of pretty much any clothing at all, whereas the beige, I don't know, I just am less likely to pair it with absolutely everything. But that said, I don't put that much thought into how I get dressed, so it's likely that this will just end up paired with everything in my wardrobe at some point. But yeah, so I bought a Bouclé yarn, and I am trying to make just a cozy jumper for myself. And quite honestly, the pattern for this could have been pretty much anything. It could have been a drop shoulder, it could have been a raglan, because the construction details are probably going to be pretty hidden by the yarn. But I bought the Elevation Loop Sweater because I wanted a saddle shoulder construction for another project, and I thought that I could kind of vet the pattern, see how I like it, and just get two projects out of one pattern. So that's kind of the logic there. Okay, so we'll get this out. It's in a bag that is now getting much too small for it because I have to stuff it in. So I've knit quite a lot of this. Thought number one is that I think it's actually probably too big. And actually in the project photos for the sweater, you can definitely see how oversized it's designed to be. And I probably should have just looked at that with a bit more of a critical eye before I cast on, because I actually don't think that that's the effect I'm going for. And on top of that, this yarn is creating a fabric that is, it's not, maybe stiff's not quite the right word, although I think it is technically stiff, but it's just very squishy. And so it doesn't drape, and therefore I think it looks quite bulky with the stitch count that it has on me. So I'll just quickly put it on and you can see what I'm talking about. So yeah, as you can see, I split the sleeves, and then I think from memory I just knit until I ran out of the ball that I was working with, although it seems like quite a lot, so maybe it's a bit more than a ball. But then I decided that I would pick up a sleeve and work on that, because my goal is also to do a mid-project block and see how it's sitting before I finish off the sleeves or the body. So I think I'll probably do that once I've finished either the decreases on the sleeve or this ball of yarn. I like the trick where you put stitch markers on your decrease so that you can be pretty confident that you're going to do the same thing on the second sleeve. And yeah, I mean, it's very, very cuddly, and it's actually probably going to be quite warm. Maybe too warm to quite fill the purpose of the other thing, which was very much something I would just throw on for a little bit of coziness around the house. My house doesn't get too cold. We're going to see how it goes with the pure bulk of fabric. Like, I don't love the way it's folding in the front, and the sleeves feel quite wide. But maybe if I block it, it will just calm down a bit. We'll see. I think I'm still realistically going to get quite a lot of wear out of it. I'm also curious what adding a collar will do to the shape of the yoke. I don't think it'll change significantly, but it might just bring everything in a little bit. It might be a bit stretched out. Yeah, I'll take this off. So, as you can see, you can't see anything. I actually made a post on my Instagram about the only way that I can count stitches or anything like that is by holding this fabric up with a light source behind it, so like this, which works quite well, but it's a bit of a faff to do every time. So for example, I did try to roughly measure my gauge on this at the beginning. So this, I would say maybe it's so huge because it's off gauge, but again, I did look at the photos and I think it's just designed like that, and then I think that my fabric is the wrong choice for that particular design decision. But yeah, I think it'll get a lot of wear. I'm probably going to make it just kind of hip length, not too huge. And yeah, the thing is, I can't resist the coziness of feeling like a teddy bear, even if it's not the most stylish. So the second work in progress that I have is the aforementioned second use of the elevation loop sweater. And this one, I am going to hack the pattern and make a cardigan, and I'm going to add stripes. So if you saw my previous video, you will see that one of the first things I ever knit that was like sweater type garment was a raglan pattern by Drops Design called Sweet Country Sunrise Jacket, and I knit that with Derirum Natura Gilead, which is a worsted weight merino yarn. And long story short, it ended up not my ideal in a bunch of ways. Like, the sleeves grew quite long in blocking, it stretched out a lot more than I expected, it had a bit more positive ease than I wanted, and the neckline was a bit too big. Plus, I don't think I really love raglan construction for that vibe that I was aiming for. So I went looking for a saddle shoulder pattern that I could use, and that's kind of where this elevation loop sweater comes in. And my idea there is that the shoulder saddle component can basically be like the first stripe of the garment. So these are quite big colour block stripes that I'm aiming for. And then I will just match the width of all the other stripes to that same kind of width. And hopefully it'll all work out looking good. And I might insert a picture here of me wearing the previous cardigan, because last video I did do a try on, but it was didn't even have buttons on it. And the reason for that is that the buttons I added originally, I actually made them in pretty much the hackiest way that I could have, which is I went out into the forest, I foraged a stick, and I used a hacksaw without even a clamp. Like, I was just holding the stick to like cut rounds of the stick, like including the bark for kind of a rustic vibe, which is not a technique I would recommend because the wood split quite a lot, and so getting a whole round took many goes. Like, I think I did like 12 cuts or something to get 5 or 6 buttons. But it's fun. I just like that kind of really handmade aesthetic sometimes. And I think it kind of goes quite well with because it's quite a thick yarn, it feels a little bit rustic to me as well. Not rustic in terms of texture, like it's very soft, but just rustic aesthetic. So I made some buttons, and then I unrelatedly got some more like wood oil and thought that the buttons could use another coat, and took them off the cardigan to do that and to do some more sanding. And then I never put them back on because by that point I had decided I'm probably going to frog this cardigan and make it again. So we are at the frogging stage. Heck yes, we are frogging. This is the cardigan. I have now removed the button band, removed the neckband, and we are frogging from the bottom up. But on top of that, I also had some leftover yarn, and so I can show you, I have cast on the new one. So, unfortunately, I've kind of got this on too smaller circumference of needles to show, but this is going to be the neckline. It's much smaller than the other one. So this is without button band, or still, sorry, without the neckband. And you can see, yeah, this white part is the shoulder saddle, and then we've got the blue is picking up the stitches for the body, and then adding to the sleeves. So what I've done is, because this teddy bear version is much too big, the pattern actually has you kind of knit this shoulder saddle to a length measurement, and I just did it out a bit shorter, which also meant that I had reduced stitch count picking up for the front and back, so the body stitch count should be reduced as well. At the moment, I think the sleeves will still end up with the same stitch count. I'm not quite sure how yet, but I think I'm going to avoid some of the increases that are in the pattern, or change the increase rate, so that I also don't end up with that same stitch count for sleeves, because I think that's also too wide. Although, the one thing that this Sweet Country Sunrise jacket had in it was kind of balloon sleeves, and I do think that's really pretty. So if I end up with quite wide sleeves, I'll probably just do a rapid decrease at the cuff, and I won't be too mad about it. Yeah, so the other thing is I would quite like probably to get to the end of the yoke on this and then do a block to see how it's sitting, because I'm using the same size needles, which is 5.5 millimeters as the original, which I think is another difference from the pattern. Yeah, so for the, gosh, I'm doing everything different. So this is off gauge as well, because the elevation loop sweater, I think it's 4.5 millimeter needles, and I'm using 5.5 to make sure that my gauge is the same as the previous one, because I liked the fabric it gave me, and I don't have enough yarn to knit an entire cardigan with with a smaller gauge. That's a fun one. But that does actually mean that I'm probably going to reach the point of splitting for sleeves before I've done quite so many increases, which is probably just the natural way to have fewer stitches in the sleeves. But I still have a bigger gauge, so I might need even fewer stitches in the sleeves than I will get. Okay, this is getting into knitting math, which I still am not an expert in. Yeah. Anyway, so the point is that I am going to block it probably pretty soon. If anything just moved around, I just had to go and hang up my laundry. I'm also sorry about the light. It's definitely getting dark. I tried to do this earlier in the day and completely failed. Okay, so yeah, I have plans to do a block for this and see how everything is going. But until I've blocked it, I can't be sure really how my gauge is doing basically compared to the last time I knit it. And I'm using the same needles, it's the same yarn, so I have reason to believe it should be pretty consistent, but it's been over a year since I knit the other version, so I have no particular reason to believe that my gauge will be consistent. And on top of that, I'm using a quite different technique to how I did the first version. So I can't remember exactly how I was knitting on that one. At the moment I knit kind of continental, except with quite a relaxed finger. I think it's inspired by Norwegian knitting, but maybe I do tension my yarn a bit differently. And I might have been doing that on the other one, but what I definitely know I did last time was I was doing Portuguese purling, because very early into the project I realised that knitting stockinette flat requires whole rows of pearls, and I found that very daunting and very tiring. I know that people complain about, it's a bit of a meme that people complain about purling, but I have found it to be, and I think there's a good reason for it. I think it's to do with the way that you have to wrap your yarn being kind of hard to pull in the right direction as you're pulling through the stitch. So I don't love purling, and for flat stockinette, I've found that the best solution is to do something like Portuguese purling maybe. So you can get a knitting pin where you tension it kind of past your chest, but I would just wrap the yarn over my neck. I watched a tutorial by Very Pink Knits to learn, so I can link that below. And you kind of end up using your thumb to push the yarn onto your needle, which I found very ergonomic. So that's what I was doing last time, and this time I've decided to try a completely new thing. So as a complete aside here, I do really like learning lots of different knitting techniques. I don't love English knitting, but I have, for example, spent some time trying to make that more efficient. I think that having different projects where you're using different techniques can be a nice way to kind of battle if you get strain or tension in your hands, as well as, you know, the classics of stretch everything out, stand up, walk around, go outside, touch grass. But on top of that, switching up the way that you're knitting in your different projects, I think can be nice, and having a mix of different fibres and needle sizes and styles. So I've personally gone on a bit of a journey to learn different knitting techniques. And the latest in this particular saga is that I'm so excited about this. I am learning to knit in mirror reverse, so backwards. So like I say, when I normally knit, I hold my yarn in my left hand and I just kind of drape it over my first index finger and I pick my stitches. So most of my movement is in my right needle. And actually what I've been doing, you know, if I'm doing ribbing or in my boyfriend's jumper, I did like a textured yoke, and for that it was obviously a combination of knits and purls in every single row. So what I tend to do there is actually I do combination knitting, which if you haven't heard of it, you intentionally wrap the yarn the wrong way around the needle in the purls, which makes it easier to do kind of a picking style purl where you just pull the yarn through with your needle. You don't need to do a whole lot of crazy stuff with the part like the fingers holding the yarn, and all it does is that it orients the stitch on the needle backwards. So normally the leading loop of your yarn, which is the part that is rightmost on the fabric, is in the front of the needle, which is why you go through the front of a stitch to knit. But if you are doing combination purling, then it ends up on the back of the needle. So it looks like you're going through the back loop as you knit it or purl it, but you're actually just still going through the leading leg. It's just that your needle is it's kind of piercing the stitch in a different direction. So that's a slightly long-winded way of saying that I normally do combination knitting, so I'm quite used to kind of fixing up the different orientation of stitches in the following row. And with the backwards knitting, I watched a couple of videos, but The basic idea is that you knit along to the end of the row, and then instead of turning your work around and then starting to purl, you leave it with the right side facing you, and then you start moving the stitches from the right needle to the left in a way to create purl stitches. Now, like I said, I watched a few videos and I didn't find that any of the techniques to create a real purl stitch looked particularly intuitive to me or felt particularly comfortable. But there was a way to just pick the yarn off your right finger, so exactly how I described my normal knitting, but all it does is that it ends up with the stitches oriented backwards on the needle. And that's fine for me because I already am used to fixing that. So I actually have started doing that basically, and what it does, and this is really elegant, it means that my knitting and my knit rows and my purl rows, what I'm doing is exactly the same on them except just mirror reversed. So my hands swap roles. So when I'm knitting, I'm always knitting through what looks like the back loop, but the leading leg's sitting on the back of the needle. And then when I get to the end of the row, I turn around and I also have to insert my needle into the back loop of the stitch, which is still the leading leg, it's just that you're going in mirror reverse. And then I just pick it off my right finger this time, which is holding the yarn, and everything just flows. And I mean, okay, I will confess, I'm definitely not natural at this yet. It feels very backwards. It is like trying to write with your wrong hand. And full disclosure, I am left-handed, so maybe also this is something that feels moderately more natural for me than it would for someone who's right-handed, although, I don't know, I feel this way about instruments as well. Like, there are left-handed guitars, but I play right-handed, which I think is because I learnt violin and there's no such thing as a left-handed violin. But in my mind, these sorts of activities, there's no obvious role for your dominant hand to be playing because both hands are doing different skills. So it's just a learned skill. You have to just practice until your hands are good at their roles. And this one's just weird because my hands are quite good at the roles of normal knitting and backwards is hard. But I'm forcing myself to practice with this particular project, and I have high hopes for this because, like I say, I've found that picking stitches is the most ergonomic, most relaxed way of knitting that I've found, and the fastest, I think. And so if I can do the exact same in reverse, if I can get to that, like 80% of the speed and comfort, then that will be pretty amazing for knitting stockinette flat. And I, would be pretty excited if that is the case. And I might even grow to like knitting cardigans and do a few more of them. So yeah, that's my major excitement at the moment. It feels like a bit of a breakthrough, like, I don't know, knitting secrets that no one told you. But yeah, I am genuinely quite hyped about it. Okay, and that leads us to my third work in progress, which is technically, it was a finished object, but I am trying to consider it a work in progress again. I find that a lot of knitters tend to complain, myself included, tend to complain about all the finishing, weaving in ends, if there's any embroidery that needs doing, if there's any, seaming. And I'm trying to persuade myself that those are all just as much part of the process as the knitting. They are less mindless, but so are decent portions of a lot of knitting patterns. So I don't really know what the mental block is there about the difference between creating fabric and fixing it up or like putting it together. Anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying. So this is, okay, let's start with the pattern. This is my Romanesco tank, which the pattern is Romanesco jumper. On Instagram, she's Ranti Studio, and her name is Ranti Ehinmola, I think. I don't really know how to pronounce it. And the yarn is the Fibre company Luma, which is half wool and then half like silk, rayon and linen. So it's kind of a bit of a summery blend, which is good because it's DK, so it would be too warm otherwise. And I've got, try on footage and stuff of this, and again, my previous video. And I mentioned in that one that I am trying to, basically this, I'll put in some close-up footage, but this stitch pattern has created some quite stretched out stitches, and I have been working on filling them in with duplicate stitch. And I think that it's really important. So similarly, when I first knit this, I did a completely different thing with the neckline, and I went back and fixed it a couple weeks ago. And I just think it is important to go back and update your knits as you have better techniques and as you have a better understanding of what would make you wear them more. So I'm really happy with that decision. And then in the spirit of that, I also have decided that, yeah, I'll make it a little bit less risque by filling in the holes across the top half of the chest. So this is duplicate stitch. I've done most of one kind of row of pattern repeats, and I think that there's maybe 6 rows of pattern repeats that I would like to do in total, and I'm just trying to work on, like, chip away at this. I'll try and do one little rectangle of duplicate stitch, you know, in an evening, and hopefully by the time the weather warms up enough that this is something I want to wear a lot, it'll just be done. The one other thing I'll say about this is that I did do extensive swatching to try and come up with the best form of increases, and I think I do still like the look of the increases I chose, but and it did kind of more evenly distribute the holiness, because I think the recommended ones just created like a column of quite big holes, whereas mine, it's more of a rectangle of just slightly larger holes. But in retrospect, I think I should have gone with one of the increased techniques that created bigger but fewer holes, because then I could have done duplicate stitching, but it would have taken less time. So that's lesson learned. If you are going to knit this, which it is such a fun pattern, it's actually knit inside out. So you like face the stockinette side, not stockinette, but the knit side, and then the outside is all pearls. And I do really love it. So yeah, I would recommend it, but be prepared to maybe do a little bit of finishing work. Yeah, and then that leads me to my final work in progress, which I can't actually show you, but it is a pair of socks, because I am someone who likes to knit socks at work, not like, yeah, so I knit socks at work during meetings, not during a meeting where I'm one-on-one with someone or where I'm actually presenting or talking, but in meetings where I am listening. I actually find that it stops me from, you know, checking my chat messages or something. And also then sometimes I have to watch videos at work as well, and like either big meetings that were recorded in a different time zone, or if I have to do a training of some sort. Yeah, so I am a meeting sock knitter. They're really portable. I don't care so much how long they take, or I don't feel quite as motivated to finish them, so I'm happy if they stay at work. And on top of that, I like socks and I want to own socks, but I don't feel motivated to knit them when I've got the opportunity to knit other projects. So it's nice to just be able to slot them in where I couldn't be realistically knitting a jumper. And I also, yeah, I do find that knitting is something that makes me absorb information better. I really wish I had known this back when I was a student. I think that I would have had a better time with lectures than trying to take notes. And I think I would have enjoyed it more as well. Anyway, so the socks that I'm knitting, they're the Mountain Walk socks handmade by Florence. There's been a bit of a saga with this particular sock yarn, which mostly of my own making. But I actually have knit 2.5 full socks in a completely different pattern, which is the Marie pattern by Yuka, which has these kind of slip stitch lattice pattern, which is, its gauge is really affected by how long the slip stitches are. So I have found in practice it's even less stretchy than stockinette would be. And maybe I should have gauge swatched and gone up a needle size. But, you know, because they were socks that I was knitting in a context where I wanted it to be mindless, I just cast on and kept knitting, and then discovered the first sock didn't fit over my heel, so I think I went up a size, and then the next one didn't fit, although at least that one I think I tried on after about 2/3. And then I made my own size that was another 8 stitches wider, and that still didn't fit. So I completely abandoned that project. I don't know, it might also be the yarn, which is nylon free, and I don't know if that would make any difference. Maybe it's just less stretchy. I think it's got, the ball band called it nettle, so I think some sort of plant fibre instead of nylon. And I will try and make sure I've got the socks, or maybe even, I still haven't frogged my third attempt at the Nuri socks, so maybe I can show that next time as well, but these are all at work. But yeah, basically I went completely the other direction because that had no stretch to it, and I went to ribbed, which has a nice amount of stretch to it, and I'm making the largest size, which we'll see if that works out for me. But I only have about the cuff. I've just gotten to the heel on the first sock. On top of all of that, these socks, I'm knitting them on teeny tiny circulars, which I bought just to try it out. And I don't think I like them because I think that I do find that they hurt my hands. And I try to relax and, you know, do a better job, but I think I'm going to switch to magic loop. And the main thing that stopped me from doing that so far is that I have the tiny circulars and the needles I would use for magic loop both at work, but I haven't validated that they're the same diameter needles. I have one of these things, which is the, you know, you can measure your gauge. This is 10 by 10, and then it's got the like kind of gauge holes for needles as well. I got my friend to help me laser cut this. I do not know how to work a laser cutter, but I helped him put together the schema, and then I watched with, you know, supreme interest as the machine made it for me. Very cool. But you can get these quite cheaply, I think, so I don't save a lot of money. Yeah, so I'll take that to work and we'll see whether or not I'm using magic loop by next time, because I think that would be a big quality of life improvement. Okay, so that's everything that I'm working on right now. And next we'll talk about my pretty concrete plans. You'll see that some of these are not quite so concrete. So the first one is a mending project. I like rock climbing. It's one of my major hobbies. And last summer we were climbing outside at a cliff face, a crag, it's called in rock climbing lingo. And we noticed that there was an abandoned jumper on the ground. And it really didn't look like anyone was going to come back for it. And it also was kind of patched. So, but kind of just with tape, or like rectangles of patching, just adhesive patches. So anyway, picked it up and took it home, and you know, we can argue about whether it's finders keepers or not, but it turns out it's fully cashmere. And the holes it had, well, first of all, I'm assuming that it wasn't purchased as a cashmere jumper to go rock climbing in, but that they got holes in it and then decided to relegate it to be an outdoor jumper. But I don't know, this is Switzerland. People do some weird stuff here. So this, yeah, has some holes. I took off the patches, and there are these quite big ones in the armpit. But it's only on one side, I think. So it should be quite easy to patch that up, and then hopefully it'll be pretty hidden. I was going to use, maybe not fully matching yarn, but kind of a subtle colour, maybe the leftover I have from my boyfriend's jumper. And it's just a, you know, store-bought, machine-made, you know, fabric, so it's too fine for me to do invisible mending. But I'm still thinking of using Swiss darning, which is replicating knit stitches, and from my understanding, it's basically like doing duplicate stitch, except that you put in some guidelines to start and duplicate stitch around them, and then at the end you remove them. So I'll link, if I follow any tutorials or something, I'll definitely link those. So that's kind of my plan for this. My other option is to maybe do some, I think Scotch darning is the one where you just, it seems like blanket stitch, kind of looped on itself a bunch of times. But yeah, I'm mostly putting this in my plan section so that I'm held a little bit accountable, because this has been sitting on this embroidery hoop, which, by the way, this is my first time using this hoop as well, so we'll see how that goes. I know some people use like darning mushrooms, or yeah, we'll see. If you have any recommendations for how to fix a hole this size, let me know. I'm very open to learning. But yeah, that's something I'm planning to start. Something else I might do is I have bought two 50-gram skeins of sock yarn. This is the style that has the little extra roll of thinner yarn to help reinforce the heel and toe. I've heard some people online complain that it's not enough for both the heel and the toe of a sock, but we'll see. I probably won't be knitting, you know, like a men's size sock. I'm also, I tend to like my socks like slightly shorter on my ankles, so we'll see if I end up using all of this, but I don't think I can get two socks out of one 50-gram skein, so yeah. I haven't done a lot of socks, and the socks I didn't pay attention to what I was doing, so we're going to find out how much of this I use. For that set of plans, I probably will look up like a yucca pattern as well, or I might, yeah, I quite like, I think I have very aligned tastes to Handmade by Florence, where I like textured socks in a neutral colour. And one other plan I have, which is only knitting adjacent, also inspired by Handmade by Florence, is I don't own sock blockers. And she mentioned in one of her videos that for a long time she just used cardboard wrapped in cling film. And I'm thinking I might make some. I don't know quite what level of production value we're going to have on that particular item. So I might be showing it off next time, and it may look the equivalent of a preschooler's craft project, but it just seems like a practical item, and mostly not actually for blocking, because I'm happy enough to just wash socks and then let them stretch onto my feet. Like, they're pretty much negative ease garments. But on the flip side, well, one, if you want to photograph your socks for social media, then they better be pretty. And then number two, actually, I have some old socks, which I won't even put you through the pain of looking at, that my aforementioned friend who knit some socks, she actually knit them for me. And they've gotten just quite a lot of pilling, and I would like to shave them. And I actually thought it might be a lot easier to do that if they were on a sock blocker. So that's my other motivation. Okay, we're blurring the line now between my concrete plans and my maybe one day, but I have some yarn, which I bought. I went on a trip to New Zealand 2 winters ago, and I bought this hand-dyed merino. Well, it's 80% superwash merino, 20% nylon, and the color is called Paddling, and it's from a company called Kiwi Yana. I think it's so pretty. I don't know if they mean paddling like dipping your feet into a forest stream, or like you're on a kayak. But it's very pretty. It does, yeah, have some really nice greens in it. It looks highly variegated. I've kind of got one that I've accidentally undone the nice twist, and I can see that there's a lot of quite light section here. I don't know if this one will have, it looks like it will have the same. These are the same dye lot. I at least knew to look for the same batch when I did it. So yeah, I am not totally sure what to do with, I think I have 800 meters of hand dyed, and I am a big fan of the Woolly Worker, and she's put out at least 2 videos now on what to do with your hand dyed skeins. I think with this quantity, I could do something like I could do a couple of quite small summer tops, and that would probably help the variegation if it's a small item. But on the flip side, I don't know if I want more than one garment in this yarn. So I'm thinking I'd like to use it all in one go. So I'm thinking maybe something like a t-shirt. And so for that, I quite like from Jessie Made, there's the Ripple Crop Tee. But she's got 2 versions. One is in fingering and one is in worsted. And obviously this is fingering yarn, so that's what I should do. But her fingering one is positive ease and her worsted one is negative ease. I think if I want to make a negative ease version, I should still buy the fingering pattern and then reduce the armhole size and size down. But if you have bought either of them and have any opinions, I would love to hear them. The other option I'm considering is a stockinette kind of blouse, also with negative ease. So I don't know why, but in my mind, the variegated yarn, I kind of want it to be negative ease. I don't know, that feels just like just your opinion, man. But that's what I'm keen for. So there's a pattern called the Bella Knot Light. There's also the Bella Knot blouse, which is just in a thicker yarn, and I've forgotten the name of the designer. I'll just put it up on screen. But I would quite like to make that too. But I'm a little bit worried that with the construction of it, it'll end up with pooling kind of around the neckline. Whereas the ripple tee, I feel like there's no basis for this, but I feel like the ribs will hide pooling a little bit more. Yeah, I don't know. If you have opinions on this, please let me know. I haven't knit with hand-dyed, especially not highly variegated, and I am a little bit at a loss what to do, but getting it out, I don't know, pretty happy with the colours again, so I should probably just try it. Okay, so we're into the loose plans section, and so the one other thing I wanted to mention was that there's a video that I watched where the knitter in it made a poppy tee into a sweater, and she was using Cardiff cashmere, which I probably won't, but I just really liked it, and I was very inspired to maybe have something similar one day. So that's something that, it's not concrete, I don't have the yarn, but I'm keeping my eye out for yarn that might work for it, and trying to just in my brain mull over if I ever see a colour where I'm like, I really want that colour in my wardrobe, maybe think about matching it to this project. I think I mentioned previously in my last video that I don't mind having yarn, but I try not to collect it because I do really love the freedom of choice of having a project in mind and then really being able to nail down exactly what yarn I want to use with it. So that's definitely a case where I've now got this in the back of my mind, and if I ever see something where I think that would be perfect, I'll be able to really jump on it. Now we're into the final section, which is recommendations. So I have a couple of things here. The first one is just a channel that I have yet to mention in the natural course of conversation, and that is Future Fibre, which is hosted by Jenny, and she's so cool. I don't know how to describe it other than just, I think she is cool, and I like her vibes. Like, I like her taste as well, and her knitting is interesting, and I've definitely learned stuff from her as well as other people. But I also just like her storytelling, I guess, and yeah. Anyway, I would recommend checking her out. Okay, and then my other two recommendations are for podcasts. As I mentioned, I am an avid podcast listener. It combines well with being on a train and knitting, something I do a fair bit each week, and I also just enjoy it at home as well. I find that I am not skilled enough, actually, in general, to knit without looking, so knitting with a podcast is a pretty ideal combo of enjoyment. I haven't gotten super into audiobooks just yet. It's something, I listened to the Harry Potter series narrated by Stephen Fry on repeat for pretty much my entire teenage years, but I have yet to, I think because I'm quite sensitive to the narrator for an audiobook, whereas podcasts feel a bit different. It's not, the narrator is kind of the medium through which all the characters have to speak, whereas podcasts, most of the time, people are able to be their own self. I don't know if that makes sense. Anyway, I do like podcasts. If you have audiobook recommendations, let me know, but I do like podcasts. And so I have two very different ones here. So one is a live play Dungeons and Dragons podcast that my boyfriend really likes and got me into, which is called Not Another D&D Podcast, or NADPod. And it's run by people who came out of kind of improv comedy, I think in College Humor, which was a YouTube series back in the day. And I think it's really well done. It's quite tightly edited, but not in a way where you feel like it's being taken crazy seriously. And it's very story focused. If you love the gritty details of Dungeons and Dragons mechanics, you probably won't like this podcast. But if you just enjoy really good storytelling, funny jokes, funny characters, I think it's really nice. And it's definitely on the comedy side. There's a lot of funny, silly moments, but I think that they're quite clever about doing it in a way where you don't feel like you lose interest in the plot or the motivations of the characters. And it's pretty rare that there's a moment where someone will do something out of character just for the joke. And then to swing in a completely wildly different direction, my other podcast recommendation is hosted by Bloomberg, and it is co-hosted by 2 Bloomberg employees and they get a guest every week, and they interview them about things to do with finance and the economy. So bear with me here. I don't read or listen to a lot about the economy, but it is one of my vague interests, and if I find a source that can make it interesting, I definitely appreciate that, because I actually think it is a really interesting topic. It's something that affects everyone, and it's not just the things that you think of when you think of economics. It's not about just the politicians setting the budgets or the big banks and investment and how they make their money. It's a lot of things to do with just, the production of goods and services that you use and consume. And some of the dynamics at play are super interesting. So the most recent episode, this is probably the fastest way to sell you on this. The most recent episode, they interviewed someone who has worked in the snack industry, and they were talking a bit about the advances in manufacturing and quality control that have allowed a lot of snack companies to produce a larger variety of flavors. So you might have noticed that, there are more Doritos flavors nowadays. That's because of improved production, technology. Okay, I think I've outed myself as a massive nerd, but if that sounds even vaguely interesting, I would recommend it. I think it's quite engaging. I think they ask the right questions, and I feel like I get exposed to ideas and information that I wouldn't normally seek out because I don't read the newspaper or read The Economist or whatever. Yeah, so that's my recommendations. I hope that at least one of those piqued your interest, although honestly, if it didn't, I would understand. But yeah, I hope that you can find something to entertain you as you knit. And yeah, happy knitting. I will see you next time.